Somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, on a bright afternoon in December of 1872, there is a ship sailing along with nobody aboard. Her sails are up, not all of them, and not neatly, but enough to keep her moving. She is steering a slightly drunken, wandering course, the way a ship does when there is no hand on the wheel. The sun is out. The sea is an ordinary grey-blue, and there is not a single living person anywhere on her deck. The ship's name is the Mary Celeste. She is a small American merchant ship, and 9 days ago there were 10 people on board. A captain, his wife, their daughter, and 7 crewmen. Right now, none of them are here. Their belongings are. Their food is 6 months of it, still sitting in the stores. The cargo is still sitting exactly where it was loaded days ago. The only thing missing, besides the people, is the ship's one small lifeboat. Now, you have almost certainly heard of this ship. And here is the strange part. Almost everything you've heard about it is wrong. What happened to the 10 people who were on board? Why would everyone aboard leave, when at first glance everything seems perfectly normal? Was it pirates? Was it a sea monster, the way the storytellers wanted it to be? Or was it something quieter and sadder, and a great deal more human than any of that? And why is the most famous fact about this ship, the one absolutely everybody knows, a story a young novelist simply made up 12 years after it happened? We'll get to all of that soon. But before we set out, if these slow journeys through history help carry you off to sleep, take a moment now to subscribe to the channel. And we will be here to do this for you again, every single night. And if you have a theory of your own about the Mary Celeste, and by the end of tonight you may have a few, leave it down in the comments. I read them, usually somewhere around 2 in the morning. So before we go any further, let's get comfortable. Dim the lights, pull the blanket up, tuck your feet in, and let's go out to the middle of the Atlantic, to a sunlit, empty deck, and find out what really happened, and what only got told. It is the 4th of December, 1802, a little after 1 in the afternoon. About 400 miles off the Azores, a small cluster of Portuguese islands sitting alone out in the open Atlantic, another ship is going about her business. She's called the Dei Gratia, a Canadian-built merchant ship under a captain named David Morehouse, and she's bound from New York to Gibraltar with a hold full of petroleum. The man at the wheel notices a sail a few miles off. Nothing alarming about that. But as the 2 ships draw closer, the men on the Dei Gratia start to frown. The other ship is moving wrong. Her sails are set badly, some up, some missing, a couple just hanging loose. She wanders back and forth across the wind, the way a horse wanders when it works out that nobody's holding the reins. They watch her for 2 hours. In all that time, not one person appears on her deck. Nobody touches a sail. Nobody waves. Nobody comes to the rail to look back at them. So Captain Morehouse does the thing any sailor would do. He sends a boat across. 2 of his men, his mate, a steady fellow named Oliver DeVoe, and the second mate, climb up onto the deck of the silent ship, and they find nothing. Or rather, they find everything except the one thing they're looking for. They find no people. The deck is wet and a bit of a mess. There's water down in the hold, about 3.5 feet of it, which sounds alarming until you remember that this is a wooden sailing ship in December, and 3.5 feet of water in the bottom of one of those is roughly the maritime version of a damp basement. Annoying, worth pumping out, not a reason to abandon the building. One of the ship's 2 pumps has been taken apart. A length of rope is trailing over the side, down into the sea. The compass box has been knocked off its stand, and its glass is broken. Down in the cabin, it's stranger still, precisely because it's so ordinary. The captain's bunk, charts and papers, a sword lying in its scabbard under the bed, which is going to matter enormously to a very silly man in a little while, so do hold on to it. The crew's clothes, folded and left. 6 months of food and fresh water in the stores. The whole cargo, barrel after barrel, sitting untouched. Everything a person needs to stay alive is here. The persons are not. And lashed across one of the hatches there is an empty space and some cut rope where the ship's single small lifeboat, a little open boat called a yawl, used to be. It is gone. Wherever the 10 people went, they went in that boat, and they took the ship's papers with them and the captain's navigation instruments. They did not take their coats. They did not take their food. They left in a hurry, but not in a blind, screaming panic, because they stopped to grab the documents that mattered before they climbed down into the boat. And then the ship they left behind did something nobody expected. She kept going. For 9 days, with not one person aboard, she sailed herself across hundreds of miles of open Atlantic. Didn't sink, didn't roll over, just calmly carried on, like an employee who never got the message that the company had closed. Now, here I have to do something slightly annoying, which is to take a wonderful story away from you before I hand you a truer one. Because if you already knew the tale of the Mary Celeste before tonight, the version in your head probably goes something like this. A ghost ship, found drifting and dead silent. And down in the cabin, this is the famous part, a meal still sitting on the table, cups of tea still warm, a breakfast half eaten as though the crew had simply vanished mid-bite, a pot still steaming on the stove, a slice of pie with a forkful gone, washing hung out to dry on the deck, and, in some tellings, a cat, asleep and perfectly content on a locker, the only living thing left to see whatever unspeakable thing had happened. It's a fantastic image. Genuinely. It has everything. The warmth still in the teacup, the people gone in a heartbeat, the cozy little scene frozen at the exact second the world ended for everyone in it. There is just one small problem with it, which is that essentially none of it is true. There was no warm tea. There was no half-eaten breakfast. There was no pie, no washing on the line, and there was, I'm sorry to report, no cat. We know this because the man who actually climbed aboard, the mate Oliver DeVoe, stood up in a courtroom a few weeks later and said so, under oath. His words were that there were, quote, no preparations for eating and nothing to eat or drink in the cabin. No meal, no set table, nothing. And even if there had been, even if there'd been a full roast dinner laid out under a little dome, It could not possibly have been warm, because the last entry written in the ship's log was 10 days old by the time anyone found her. 10 days. You could leave a cup of tea sitting out for 10 days, come back, and find that it has developed a thick skin, a strong smell, and possibly some opinions. Nothing on that ship was steaming. So where did the warm tea come from? Where did the cat come from? Hold that question, because the answer is one of my favorite things in this entire story, and it involves a very famous author you have absolutely heard of, behaving in a way that would get him sued today. But before we get to the man who made all of that up, I want to do the thing the legend never bothers to do. I want to tell you who was actually on the ship, because they were real people, and they deserve better than to be furniture in a ghost story. The captain was a man named Benjamin Briggs. He was 37, from Massachusetts, one of 5 brothers who all went to sea. It was that kind of family. By every account, he was a careful, serious man. He read his Bible. He didn't drink. He was the sort of captain other people trusted, and he trusted himself for good reason, because he had been doing this his whole life. And he wasn't only the captain of the Mary Celeste. He'd put his own money into her. He was a part owner. In a real sense, this was his ship. With him was his wife, Sarah. They had been married 10 years. And with the 2 of them was their daughter, Sophia, who was 2 years old. They had another child as well, a little boy named Arthur, who was 7. Arthur was not on the ship. He'd been left at home with his grandmother because he was old enough now for school, and you don't pull a 7-year-old out of school to spend 2 months crossing the ocean. That decision, small, ordinary, sensible, to leave the older child home for the school term, is the only reason there is anyone left in this family at all. Remember Arthur? We'll come back to him. And then there was the crew. 7 men, hand-picked by Briggs himself, because a careful captain chooses careful men. His first mate, Albert Richardson, he knew and trusted personally. There was a second mate, a steward who did the cooking, and 4 German sailors, among them 2 brothers, Volkert and boy Lorenzen. 10 people, a family, and the men they sailed with. That is who was on the Mary Celeste. Not a ghost story. A small floating town of 10 people out on the water together. So let's go back to the start of the voyage, before any of it went wrong, when it was just an ordinary job. In early November of 1872, the Mary Celeste was tied up at a pier on the East River in New York, taking on her cargo. And the cargo is worth knowing about, because it matters later. She was carrying 1,700 barrels of alcohol. Not the drinking kind. This was raw industrial alcohol, the sort used in factories, bound for Genoa, in Italy, where it was going to be used in the making of wine. Briggs supervised the loading himself, barrel after barrel, down into the hold. While the ship was loading, Briggs wrote a letter to his mother. It's a completely ordinary letter, the kind of quick note you'd send today just to say all is well. But one line of it has survived, and it's a little hard to read now, knowing what's coming. He wrote, "Our vessel is in beautiful trim, and I hope we shall have a fine passage." In beautiful trim. He was proud of his ship. He thought she was in lovely shape. He was looking forward to a good crossing. They were meant to leave on the 5th of November, but Briggs didn't like the look of the weather. So he did the careful thing, the thing he always did, and anchored just off Staten Island and waited 2 days for it to settle. And during that wait, his wife Sarah wrote a letter too, to her mother-in-law back home. In it, she mentions Arthur, the little boy they'd left behind. She writes, "Tell Arthur I make great dependence on the letters I shall get from him." She is telling her 7-year-old, through his grandmother, that she is counting on his letters, that she wants to hear from him while she's away. It is the most ordinary, most human line in this entire story. A mother, about to be out of reach for 2 months, asking her little boy to please write to her. On the 7th of November, the weather cleared, and the Mary Celeste sailed out into the open Atlantic. The last thing anyone ever wrote in her logbook was a plain position note on the morning of the 25th of November. It placed her right beside a small island in the Azores called Santa Maria. After that, the log is blank. Whatever happened to the 10 people on board happened somewhere past that quiet, ordinary morning. Out beyond the last island, in open water, with no one else around for hundreds of miles. So picture the spot Captain Morehouse of the Dei Gratia is now in. He's in the middle of the ocean, and he has just found a perfectly good ship with nobody on it. By the law of the sea, a ship found abandoned like that is salvage. If you can bring her safely into port, you're owed a reward, often a healthy share of what the ship and her cargo are worth. So this is, potentially, a very good day for Captain Morehouse. But it's also a problem, because he now has 2 ships and only 1 crew. So he splits his men. He sends his mate DeVoe and 2 sailors back aboard the Mary Celeste to sail her, keeps the rest on his own ship, and the 2 vessels set off together for the nearest sensible port, which is Gibraltar, the great rock at the mouth of the Mediterranean, about 600 miles away. They make it in just under 2 weeks, the 4-man skeleton crew nursing the silent ship the whole way, and they come into Gibraltar in the middle of December. And this is the point where the story should simply have ended. A ship found empty, brought safely into port, the salvage men paid, the whole thing filed under "the ocean is enormous and sometimes a thing happens out on it that is never fully explained." That is how it should have gone. It is not how it went, because waiting in Gibraltar was a man who looked at this sad, soggy, empty little ship and saw the crime of the century. His name, and I promise you I am not inventing this, was Frederick Solly Flood. He was the Attorney General of Gibraltar, which is a very grand title, and he had a personality built to match it. One historian who studied the case later described him as a man whose, quote, "arrogance and pomposity were inversely proportional to his IQ," which is a beautifully polite way of saying the less he understood about a thing, the more certain of himself he became. And Frederick Solly Flood was certain that the Mary Celeste was the scene of a terrible crime. He had theories. Oh, he had theories. Perhaps the crew had broken into the alcohol cargo, gone mad with drink, murdered the captain and his family, and fled. Perhaps Captain Morehouse and the men of the Dei Gratia had crept up on the Mary Celeste, killed everyone aboard, and invented the whole "we found her abandoned" story to collect the salvage money. Murder, mutiny, conspiracy. Solly Flood was open to all of them, so long as it was a crime, because a man does not get this excited about a damp basement and some missing rope. So he investigated for 3 months, and he went looking for evidence of a slaughter with the tireless energy of a man who has already decided exactly what he is going to find. He found the sword, the one under the captain's bunk. I told you to hold on to it. He drew it out, and there were stains on the blade, and Solly Flood knew that he was looking at dried blood. He found dark marks cut into the timbers of the hull near the bow, and he became convinced they'd been made with an axe or a blade. Signs of violence, evidence of the massacre. He had it. He had his crime. And then he made the fatal mistake of letting people who actually knew things look at his evidence. The stains on the sword were sent off to be properly analyzed. They were not blood. They were rust, with perhaps a trace of something like spilled lemon. The sinister cuts on the hull were examined by a captain from the United States Navy, who took one look and explained that they were entirely natural, just the ordinary way the sea works at the timbers of a wooden ship over the years. Not an axe, not a blade. Water and wood and time. Every single piece of Frederick Solly Flood's great murder case turned out to be the nautical equivalent of being startled in the dark by your own coat hanging on the back of a door. He spent 3 months hunting killers, and what he had actually found was rust, weathering, and his own imagination. In the end, he had to let the ship go. Though he never quite let the suspicion go, the salvage reward the De Gratia men finally received was unusually small, a quiet little insult from officials who couldn't prove a thing but didn't want to look as though they'd missed one. So if the warm tea and the sleeping cat were in nobody's courtroom testimony, if the real evidence was rust and weathered wood, then where did the ghost ship come from? Where did all those gorgeous, specific, utterly invented little details come from? They came from a 24-year-old doctor who wasn't a very busy doctor yet, and who was earning a bit of extra money on the side by writing stories. His name was Arthur Conan Doyle. Yes, that one. The man who, a few years later, would invent Sherlock Holmes. In 1884, 12 years after the Mary Celeste was found empty, Doyle published a short story. He published it anonymously in a magazine, written as a first-person account by a survivor of the abandoned ship, telling the true tale of what had happened aboard. It was fiction. Complete fiction. He took the real, genuinely strange case and he decorated it. He added the perfectly set breakfast table. He added the abandoned mid-meal feeling. He built a dramatic, entirely invented plot of murder and revenge on top of it. He gave the public the spooky, satisfying ghost ship that the real, soggy facts had stubbornly refused to provide. And he made 2 changes that tell you everything you need to know. The rescuing ship, the De Gratia, he left almost exactly as she was. He kept her name perfectly correct. But the famous ship, the empty one, he renamed. He called her the Mary Celeste. Marie, spelled the French way, with an IE on the end. The real ship was the Mary Celeste. Mary, the plain English name. And here is the part I find genuinely remarkable. Doyle's made-up French misspelling, Marie Celeste, became, for the next 100 years, the way most of the world spelled and said the name of this ship. The fiction was so much more popular than the facts that it quietly painted over them. People learned the wrong name from a short story and then taught the wrong name to their children. It got worse, or better, depending on how you feel about these things. Doyle's story was so convincing that a newspaper, the Boston Herald, actually reprinted it as a true news report, a work of fiction printed in the paper as fact. And there are accounts that even our friend Frederick Solly Flood, the great investigator himself, read Doyle's little story and took parts of it seriously, which raises the lovely possibility that the official who investigated the real ship ended up muddled by a tale a novelist made up about her. After Doyle, the gates were open and everyone piled in. Over the years, people decided the Mary Celeste had been attacked by a giant squid, or struck by a freak wave that washed every soul off the deck, but somehow left the breakfast untouched, or that it was aliens, or sea monsters, or a curse. Eventually, and she vanished nowhere near the place, people began filing her under the Bermuda Triangle, which is the folklore equivalent of blaming anything you can't explain on the one spooky thing you happen to have heard of. It became a kind of theory circus, and the thing about a circus is that it's a great deal of fun, and none of it is real. And meanwhile, the 10 actual people who climbed down into that little boat have been quietly buried under 100 years of squid. So let's sweep the squid and the curse and the French misspelling off the table and ask the real question, the quiet one, underneath all the noise. If there was no crime and no monster and no warm tea, then what actually happened to Benjamin Briggs, his family, and his crew? We don't know for certain. We never will. No bodies were ever found. The little boat was never found. There is no last page of the log to tell us. And anyone who claims to know exactly what happened on that ship is doing precisely what Conan Doyle did, making up a good story. But we can make a careful guess from the real clues the boarding party actually found. It's only a theory. It just happens to be the one nearly everyone who studies this case ends up landing on, and the kind of guess Captain Briggs himself would have respected. Remember the things aboard that ship that didn't quite fit? One of the pumps had been taken apart. A sounding rod, a tool for measuring how much water is down in the hold, was lying out on the deck, as if someone had been urgently checking the level. There were a few feet of water below, and the cargo was 1,700 barrels of alcohol, 9 of which were later found to be empty. They had leaked. Now stand for a moment where Briggs was standing. You are a careful captain, and you become aware of 2 frightening things at once. There is water in your hold and a pump that isn't working properly, so you can't easily tell how fast you're taking it on. And a bad reading off that sounding rod could make it look as if you're sinking far faster than you really are. And at the very same time, you may be smelling alcohol fumes rising up out of the hold from those leaking barrels. In an age before anyone properly understood how and when fumes like that might catch and explode. You are standing on a wooden ship that might be filling with water and might also be about to blow up. So you make a decision, not a wild one, a careful one, the sort you have trained for your whole life. You put your wife, your 2-year-old daughter, and your 7 crewmen into the ship's small boat. You tie the small boat to the ship with a rope, so you won't lose her, and you pull off a short distance and you wait. You wait to see whether the ship is going to sink or burn or simply settle down and be fine. It is the sensible plan. Stay close. Stay tied on. Ride out the danger in the boat and climb back aboard once it passes. And then the one thing you did not plan for happens. The wind comes up. The rope joining the little boat to the ship parts, snaps, or has to be cut in the rising sea. And in a moment, the gap between the small open boat and the big ship begins to open, and it keeps opening, because the ship still has sails set, and the small boat has 10 frightened people and a pair of oars. The Mary Celeste sails away from them, calmly, steadily, exactly the way we watched her sail at the very beginning of tonight's story. Except now there are 10 people in an open boat behind her, watching their ship, their food, their shelter, their entire chance of living, shrink against the horizon and go. They were off the Azores, in the open Atlantic, in December, in a small open boat, a real family, and 7 real men. Almost certainly, they drowned. The most likely reason is not a curse and not a crime. It's that a good captain made a reasonable decision on bad information and was unlucky with the weather. That is the whole monster in the end. The wind and a frayed rope and a few feet of water that may not even have been as dangerous as it looked. And the ship herself? You'd think a vessel with a story like that would be owed a story-like ending. A grand one. Lost in a storm with all her mysteries still aboard, perhaps, or quietly retired and remembered. She got nothing so kind. After Gibraltar, the Mary Celeste was a marked ship. Word had gone round. She was the ship where everyone vanished, the unlucky one, the one nobody wanted. Sailors are superstitious, and owners are practical, and a ship with a reputation like that is hard to crew and hard to make money with. She changed hands again and again, and she lost money for nearly everyone who touched her for 13 years. And then, in 1885, she fell into the hands of a captain named Gilman Parker. And Gilman Parker looked at this famous, unlucky, money-losing ship, and he had an idea. Not a romantic idea. A grubby one. He loaded her up with a cargo that he insured for far, far more than it was actually worth. By the accounts, it was largely junk, dressed up on paper as something valuable. And then he deliberately sailed the Mary Celeste onto a coral reef off the coast of Haiti. On purpose. He wrecked her so that he could collect the insurance money on a cargo that had never been worth much at all. It is about the least mysterious thing a person can do to a ship. It is just fraud. The famous ghost ship, the vessel of 1,000 sea monster theories, was killed on purpose for a cheap insurance scam by a man trying to make a quick and dishonest dollar. And it didn't even work. The scheme was clumsy, and it came apart, and Gilman Parker was put on trial in Boston, not only for fraud, but for a crime with the wonderful old name of barratry, which, when it means wrecking a ship on purpose like this, was once serious enough that a man could hang for it. Parker didn't hang. The jury couldn't agree, and the case was settled out. But he was finished, ruined, disgraced, his money and his good name gone. He died in poverty just a few months later. And the ship's real logbook, the one with the real final entries, was lost around the same time. Which is the reason that, to this very day, the only surviving record of the Mary Celeste's last course is a copy made by none other than Frederick Solly Flood, the pompous prosecutor who got everything else about her wrong. So that is the true ending. Not a ghost ship sailing on forever into the mist. A tired old vessel run up onto a reef on purpose for the insurance money by a man who died broke for having done it. The legend is grander, I'll give it that. But this, the cheap, sad, ordinary human truth of it, is what actually happened. And that is the Mary Celeste. Not the version with the warm tea and the sleeping cat. That one belongs to a young writer with a magazine deadline. The real one is quieter and sadder, and in its own way far stranger. 10 ordinary people who did a sensible thing and were lost for it. A ship that sailed herself across the ocean and was then wrecked on purpose for a few dishonest dollars. And a mystery that turned out to be made not of monsters, but of weather and rust, and the stories people couldn't stop telling about her. There is one piece of it I want to leave you with, though, the closest thing this story has to a mercy. Remember Arthur, the little boy, 7 years old, left home with his grandmother so he wouldn't miss the school term. Because his parents made that small, ordinary, sensible decision, Arthur was not on the ship. He grew up. He lived a long life. The family that went out onto the water did not all go. One of them stayed home by chance and a school calendar and carried on. We don't get to know the last hours of the people in that little boat. No one does, and no one ever will. But we don't have to be frightened of it, you and I, here, tonight, because wherever you are listening from, you are not in a small boat in a December ocean. You are warm. You are dry. You are still. The cold Atlantic is far away and 150 years in the past. And tonight, the only thing you have to do is let this quiet story carry you off to sleep. So let the ship go. Let her sail off the edge of the story, the same way she sailed off toward the horizon. Quiet, unbothered, and finally done. Let the questions stay unanswered. They're allowed to be. And let yourself rest. Sleep well. And we will be right here to do this for you again tomorrow night. It is the deepest part of the night, that hour when the world has not yet decided to become morning. And you are lying on a narrow bed, high up, on one of the upper floors of a tall apartment building. The Romans call a building like this an insula, an island, a great block of stone and brick and timber, 5 or 6 stories high, packed with families rising up out of the narrow streets like a cliff. The higher you live, the cheaper the rooms and the longer the climb. So up here, near the top, the ceiling is low and the room is small. But it is yours for tonight. There is a single small window with a wooden shutter latched against the night air. There is the faint, warm, oily smell of the little clay lamp that burned down hours ago. And there is the dark, soft and complete. And there are sounds. Listen. Far below you, down in the street, you can hear the slow, heavy turning of cartwheels on stone. Carts and wagons are not allowed through the city in the daytime. There are simply too many people. The streets are too narrow. So all the great business of feeding a million mouths happens in the dark. All night long, the wagons come in from the countryside and the river docks, loaded with grain and wine and oil and stone. And the drivers call softly to their mules, and the wheels groan, and the whole slow river of supply moves through the sleeping city beneath you. It should be a noise that keeps you awake, but you've lived here long enough that it isn't. It's just the sound of the city breathing in the dark, the creak and rumble of the wheels, a voice once, somewhere, the distant trickle of water from a public fountain that never stops running, day or night, fed by the aqueducts that march into the city across the hills. Water and wheels and the dark. You are warm. You are not needed yet. You let your eyes close again, and you float for a while on the sound of the carts going by. And then, very slowly, the dark begins to thin. You don't see it so much as feel it. A grayness at the edge of the shutter. The first, faint, cool blue of the light that comes before the sun. And with it, the city begins to change its sound. The carts are fewer now, and underneath, something new rises up. The small, busy noises of a great many people, all beginning their day at once. Closest of all, somewhere below, there is the smell of bread. The bakers have been awake for hours. All through the city, in hundreds of small bakeries, the millstones have been turning since the middle of the night, grinding the grain, and the ovens have been heating. And now, as the light comes, the first loaves are coming out, round and dark-crusted and warm. And that smell, that simple, ancient, comforting smell of fresh bread in the morning, rises up through the cool air and finds you, even up here. You can hear shutters being unlatched and folded back, all down the street, as the little shops on the ground floor open their fronts to the day. You can hear water being drawn at the fountain on the corner, the splash of it into jars, the murmur of the people waiting their turn, neighbors, half asleep, exchanging a quiet word. Somewhere, a broom is sweeping a step. Somewhere, a child briefly cries and is comforted and is quiet again. This is the first hour of the Roman day. They don't count the hours the way we do, with fixed numbers on a clock. For them, the day is simply the time between sunrise and sunset, divided into 12 parts. 12 hours that stretch long in summer and shrink short in winter, rising and falling with the sun. So the first hour is not a number. It is this: the grey light, the smell of bread, the shutters opening, the water at the fountain. The city, gently, waking up. You rise. You wash your face from a basin of cool water. And you go down the dark, narrow, winding stair of the insula, past the doors of your neighbors, flight after flight, down toward the street and the light. and you step out into the morning. The street is a canyon. The buildings rise up high and close on either side, so that the rising sun only touches the very tops of them, the upper walls glowing warm and gold, while down here at the bottom it is still cool and blue and shadowed. The street is paved with great blocks of worn grey stone, and at the crossings there are tall stepping stones set into the road so that you can cross from one side to the other without putting your feet down into the water and the mud that runs along the gutters. Already the street is filling. A man carries a tray of small loaves on his head. Two women stand talking in a doorway. A line of schoolboys, yawning, follows a tired-looking teacher. The shop fronts are open now. A man selling oil from great jars, a woman with baskets of olives and figs, a smith, not yet hammering, laying out his tools. Painted signs, faded and bright, hang above the doors. The smell of the city is everything at once. Bread and wood smoke, and the green smell of vegetables and stone and water and people. You pass a knife grinder setting up at his wheel, and a cobbler laying out strips of soft leather, and a man up a short ladder, painting fresh red letters onto a wall to announce something. A sale, a show, a room to let. You pass a little shrine set into the corner where two streets meet. A small niche in the wall with a painted figure inside, and before it a garland of flowers, fresh this morning, and a stub of candle still burning. A girl fills a tall jar at the fountain and swings it up onto her shoulder, balanced, and walks away without spilling a single drop. A cat watches all of it from a warm ledge, half asleep, unbothered, as cats have watched the streets of every city in every age of the world. None of it is hurried. None of it is for you. It is only the ordinary morning of an ordinary street, doing again what it has done every morning for longer than anyone alive can remember. And you let it wash gently past you, the colors and the voices and the warm rising smell of the bread, asking nothing, meaning nothing, simply going on. You let the current of the morning carry you along, in no hurry at all, toward the heart of the city. But first, this morning, there is a call to pay. Down a quieter side street, the tall apartment blocks give way to something different. A high, blank, windowless wall with a single grand doorway. This is a domus, the house of a wealthy family, and from the outside it shows the street almost nothing. The Romans build their fine houses inward, turning their backs on the noise, keeping all their beauty hidden inside for themselves. You step through the doorway, out of the noise of the street, and the world goes quiet and cool. You are in the atrium, the great entrance hall, and the first thing you feel is the calm of it. The floor is laid with tiny tiles in patterns, a mosaic, smooth and cool underfoot. The walls are painted, deep reds and soft greens and little distant landscapes, gardens and birds and far-off buildings, painted so finely they seem like windows. And above you, in the center of the high ceiling, there is a wide square opening to the open sky, so that a soft column of morning light falls straight down into the room. And directly beneath it, set into the floor, there is a shallow pool of rainwater, still and bright, catching the light and throwing soft, wavering reflections up onto the painted walls. You have come, like dozens of others this morning, for the salutatio, the morning greeting. It is one of the great rituals that holds Roman life together. All across the city, at this hour, important men receive their visitors, their friends, their dependents, the ordinary people who rely on them. You wait your turn in the cool hall, among the others, and when it comes, you exchange a few words of respect, and you are given a small gift in return. A little money, perhaps, or a basket of food for the day. A favor remembered, a bond renewed. And then you step back out, past the still pool and the falling light, through the grand doorway and back into the bright and rising noise of the street. For the sun is higher now, and the whole city is going to one place. You follow the crowd downhill, and the streets grow wider and grander, and suddenly you come out of the shadowed canyons into open light and space, and there it is before you, the Forum, the heart of Rome, the heart, you might almost say, of the world. It opens out in front of you, a great paved square ringed and crowded with marble. Temples stand all around, lifted up on high steps, their tall columns catching the sun, their roofs bright with gold. There are the long halls they call basilicas, where business is done and judges hear their cases in the shade of high colonnades. There are arches, carved all over with figures, raised to remember old victories. There are statues everywhere, emperors and gods and heroes in bronze and marble, gazing out over the heads of the crowd. And the crowd. The whole of Rome seems to be here. There are men in togas, the heavy, folded white wool of the formal citizen, moving slowly and importantly through the press. There are far more in simple tunics, the everyday dress of everyone who actually works. Shopkeepers and porters and clerks and labourers in undyed wool and brown and grey. There are sellers calling their wares and money changers at their tables, and a knot of people gathered to listen to a man making a speech from the steps. There is the smell of incense drifting from the open doors of the temples, sweet and resinous, mixing with the smell of the crowd and the food and the warm stone. And over it all there is the sound, not a roar exactly, but a vast, layered, continuous murmur, the sound of tens of thousands of voices and footsteps blending together into something almost like the sea. Off to one side rise the newest wonders of the city, the grand squares the recent emperors have built, and a tall column carved in a winding spiral from bottom to top, with thousands of tiny figures telling the story of a war, still bright and sharp and new. Nearby, a market climbs up the hillside in tier upon tier of little shops, selling everything the empire can carry to its capital: silk from the Far East, spices, glass, wine, perfume, pottery, cloth. You find a place to stand in the shade at the foot of a temple's high marble steps, and for a while you just watch. Up the steps, in the cool of the great doorway, a thread of incense smoke rises and bends in the still air, sweet and grey. An old man sits on the lowest step with a fold of bread in his lap, tearing off pieces and scattering them. and the pigeons gather around his feet in a soft grey crowd, murmuring and shifting. In the deep shade of one of the long halls, the basilicas, you can see clusters of men standing about the cases being heard, the slow business of the law going on in low, serious, unhurried voices. A wealthy woman passes, carried in a covered chair on the shoulders of her bearers, the curtains half drawn, swaying gently above the crowd. Everywhere there is marble, and the marble holds the light, so that the whole vast square seems to glow softly from every side. It is grand beyond anything, and yet, standing here in the shade with the pigeons and the incense and the murmur, it is also, somehow, peaceful. You could stand here all morning, just watching. But the sun climbs on, and the heat gathers in the great open square, and you begin to feel, in the simplest way, hungry. So you turn off the forum into a side street, where the shade returns, and you find what nearly every Roman finds at the middle of the day, a thermopolium, a food counter. It is a small shop, open to the street, with a wide masonry counter facing out, and set down into the top of the counter are great round clay jars, sunk to their rims, keeping food warm or cool. Most of the people in this city, living high up in their small rooms, have no kitchen of their own, no place to cook, no safe way to keep a fire. And so they eat like this, out in the street, standing or leaning at the counter, buying a hot bowl of something simple. You buy a piece of bread, still soft, and some olives, dark and salty, and a little cheese, and a handful of figs, sweet and heavy. You might have a bowl of lentils or chickpeas, stewed soft and warm. And to drink, you have what everyone drinks, wine, but never strong, always cut with plenty of water, so that it is light and sour and refreshing in the heat. Or simpler still, posca, just water sharpened with a little vinegar, the plain, cheap, thirst-quenching drink of soldiers and workers and ordinary folk. You lean at the counter and you eat slowly, with your fingers, watching the street go by. The midday heat has settled over the city now, and the pace of everything has softened. Shutters are being half closed against the sun. Voices are lower. The great rush of the morning has spent itself, and the city, for an hour or two, leans back and breathes, full and warm and a little sleepy, just as you are. And in the warm, slow, golden middle of the afternoon, you go where Rome goes to feel most at peace. You go to the baths. There is nothing in our world quite like the great baths of Rome. They are vast as palaces, and they are open to nearly everyone, for a coin so small it is almost nothing, or for nothing at all. They are not only a place to get clean, they are the living room of the whole city, where Romans of every kind come, every single afternoon, to soak and sweat and rest and talk and simply be. You step inside, out of the sun, and the sound changes again. It becomes an echo. Voices and footsteps and splashing water, all rising up into high vaulted ceilings and rolling back down softened, blurred, distant, the way sound moves in a great stone hall. You undress and leave your clothes in a small niche, in a room with attendants watching over them. And then you begin the slow, warm journey through the rooms. You pass through a warm room first, where the air is gentle and the chill of the outside falls away from your skin. The floors here are warm beneath your bare feet, for under the whole building, hidden, slaves tend great furnaces, and the hot air flows through spaces beneath the floors and inside the very walls, so that the stone itself is warm and breathes its heat up into the rooms. It is a marvel you cannot see, only feel. Warm marble underfoot, warm air all around. Before the heat, though, like many who come here, you pass first through the open exercise yard, the palestra, a wide court open to the sky, ringed with columns. Here, in the late afternoon sun, people move and stretch and play before they bathe. Some throw a small ball back and forth in easy looping arcs. Some wrestle gently, more for the loosening than the contest. Some only walk the edges in the shade of the colonnade, talking. An attendant works oil into a man's shoulders. The light comes down warm and gold into the court, and the sand is soft, and there is the soft thud of the ball, and easy laughter, and the low hum of voices echoing off the high walls. You don't have to join in. You can simply stand a moment in the warm light and feel the day beginning, already, to slow and soften and turn toward rest. And then you come to the hot room, and the heat folds around you like a heavy, soft blanket. The air is thick and steaming. There is a great hot pool, and people lie in it to their shoulders, eyes half closed, and there are basins of hot water along the walls. And the whole room glows in the slatted golden light that falls through high windows, lighting the rising steam. You lower yourself into the hot water, and the warmth goes into your shoulders, into your back, into your tired legs, into the small, deep places where the day has gathered, and it loosens all of it and lets it go. They have no soap, not as we know it. Instead, you are rubbed with fine oil, and then the oil is scraped away with a small curved tool of bronze called a strigil, drawn smoothly across the skin, carrying away the oil and the dust and the sweat of the day, and leaving you clean and warm and glowing and loose. And when, at last, you have had enough of the heat, there is a cold pool waiting, bright and shocking and wonderful, to close your skin and wake you gently and leave you tingling and new. And then there is nothing to do at all. You wrap yourself in a length of cloth, and you find a warm bench or a quiet corner of the colonnade, and you simply rest. Around you, the murmur and the echo go on, the splash of water, the low voices, the soft slap of feet on wet marble, somebody laughing far away, all of it blurred and gentle and warm. You are clean. You are warm all the way through. You are not needed anywhere. There is, for this long, golden hour, absolutely nothing in the world you have to do. When at last you rise and dress and step back outside, the light has changed. The fierce white heat of midday is gone. The sun has swung low and turned gold, and it lies along the streets in long warm bars, and the shadows stretch out soft and blue and long. You are in no hurry. So you walk, slowly, the long way, out toward the open ground at the edge of the old city, by the river, where there are gardens. The Romans love their gardens. There are public ones, planted with shade trees and threaded with paths, and long covered walkways, porticos, where you can stroll out of the sun between rows of cool columns, with fountains splashing softly somewhere out of sight. People walk here in the evening as you are walking, slowly, in twos and threes, talking quietly or alone, just breathing the cooler air. There are roses somewhere. There is the green smell of clipped hedges and watered earth. There is the endless, gentle sound of falling water. You walk the length of one of the long porticos between the cool rows of columns, the low sun coming through them sideways so that bars of gold and shadow fall across the path, one after another, and your steps fall into the slow rhythm of them. Gold, shadow, gold, shadow. Out on the lawns, under the shade trees, a peacock picks its slow way across the grass, dragging its long tail behind it, in no more hurry than you are. Two old friends sit on a stone bench beneath a plane tree, not even talking now, just sitting, watching the light go gold. A fountain at the center of the garden lifts a soft plume of water into the warm air and lets it fall back, again and again, the sound of it cool and steady and tireless. You could sit here too, if you liked, or you could simply keep walking, slowly, between the columns, letting the evening come down around you, breathing the watered garden air, going nowhere in particular with all the time in the world. And as you come out toward more open ground, you lift your eyes, and there, across the rooftops, catching the last and best of the golden light, stands the most enormous building you have ever seen. It is the great amphitheater, the one that later ages will call the Colosseum. It rises in arch upon arch upon arch, ring upon ring, 4 great stories of pale golden stone, curving away around its huge oval, taller than anything around it, immense and serene against the deepening sky. In the upper arches, statues stand in their frames, looking out over the city. The lowering sun washes the travertine stone a deep, warm honey gold, and the long shadows of the arches fall across one another, and the whole vast structure seems to glow from within, quiet now, and empty and still. You don't go in tonight. You only stand at a little distance in the cooling evening and look up at it, at the sheer impossible scale of it, the patience and the skill that raised it, the way it holds the last light. Pigeons turn around the upper rings. The first swifts of evening cut and scatter through the gold air, and the great stone mountain stands there, calm and golden and tremendous, as the day burns slowly down behind it. It is enough just to have seen it. You turn in the soft light and you make your way back in toward the city and toward home and toward supper. For now the day folds toward its best and quietest hour. As the light goes amber and then rose, the city is coming home. The shops are folding their shutters closed for the night. The crowds in the forum have thinned and gone, and in house after house, room after room, all across Rome, the same gentle thing is happening. People are lying down to eat. This evening, you are welcomed into a household for the cena, the dinner, the one true meal of the Roman day. It is a modest home, warm and simple. In the dining room, 3 low couches are set around a small table, and on the couches with cushions, you all recline. For the Romans do not sit to dine, they lie, propped on the left elbow at their ease, reaching to the table with the right hand. It feels strange for a moment, and then it feels like exactly the right way to end a day. To eat lying down, soft and easy, in the lamplight. For now the lamps are lit. Little flames of olive oil in lamps of clay and bronze set here and there about the room, throwing a low, warm, golden, wavering light up the painted walls and gathering everyone into a small, glowing, intimate circle against the gathering dark outside. The food is simple and good. There are eggs and olives and small salt fish to begin. There is bread, of course, and a dish of lentils or beans and vegetables, and perhaps a little roasted meat or fish, seasoned with herbs and with the salty, fermented sauce the Romans put on nearly everything. The wine, again, is watered, poured cool. And to finish, the sweetest things they have: fruit, ripe figs and grapes and apples and nuts and honey. There is no hurry to any of it. The courses come slowly. Between them, there is talk. Easy, drifting, unimportant talk. The talk of people who are tired in a good way, and full and warm, and glad to be among friends at the end of a long day. Between the courses, a servant comes quietly round with a basin of scented water and a soft cloth to rinse the fingers, and the small kindness of it, the warm water, the clean cloth, is somehow one of the nicest moments of the whole long day. In the corner, almost unnoticed, a girl plays a few soft notes on a small lyre. Not a performance, just a thread of gentle sound under the talk, rising and falling, drifting in and out of your attention like the lamplight itself. The flames lean and steady and lean again in some small breath of air. The painted figures on the walls glow and dim. You are not really listening to the words anymore, only to the warm sound of voices, the low music, the small clink of a cup set down, the easy laughter of people who have nowhere else they need to be. The lamplight flickers. Someone tells a long, slow story you only half follow. A cup is refilled. Outside, beyond the walls, you can hear the city settling, the last footsteps in the lane, a door closing, a dog, once, far off. And in here, it is only warmth and low light and quiet voices and the good heaviness that comes after a day well spent and a meal well eaten. When at last you say your good nights and step outside, the day is wholly gone. The sky above the dark canyon of the street has deepened to a soft, glowing blue, and then to black, and the first stars are out. There is no light in the streets now, but what people carry. A neighbor passes with a small lamp cupped against the breeze, a little moving point of gold. The wealthy go by with a servant ahead of them bearing a lantern, lighting the way over the stepping stones. The shops are all shuttered and dark and silent. The great rush and roar of the day has drained away completely, and the city has gone soft and shadowed and still. Somewhere, a fountain still runs, patient in the dark, the way it ran before dawn. Somewhere, a watchman of the night passes on his slow round, listening, watching for fire, his footsteps steady on the stone. You climb slowly the long winding stair of the insula, up through the dark and sleeping building, past the closed doors, flight after flight, all the way back to your small room at the top, under the roof, close to the sky, and you lie down. The shutter is open a little tonight to the cool night air, and through the gap you can see a scatter of stars, very far and very clear above the dark roofs of Rome. Below you, the city has lain down too. A whole million souls in their thousands of rooms, breathing in the dark. All around you, near and far, the greatest gathering of human beings anywhere on the earth. All of them, like you, letting go of the day. You hear it begin again, softly, far below. The first carts of the night, coming in over the stones, slow and heavy and patient, carrying tomorrow's bread and wine into the sleeping city. The same sound that woke you in the dark this morning. The wheels and the water and the low voices, going on as they have gone on for 1,000 years, and will go on long after this night, whether you are awake to hear them or not. There is nothing left for you to do. The day is complete. You walked it from end to end, from the first grey light to the last lit star, and you missed nothing. And now it is finished, and it asks nothing more of you. So let your eyes close. Let the stars blur softly in the gap of the shutter. Let the sound of the carts grow distant and dim. Let the warmth of the baths, still somewhere in your shoulders, carry you down. Let the lamplight of the dinner glow and fade. Let Rome sleep all around you, vast and quiet and old, under its scatter of stars. There is the water, still running in the dark. There are the wheels, far away. There is your own slow breath, longer now and softer. And there is sleep, rising up to meet you, gently, the way the dark thinned into morning, only now in reverse, the light folding away, the day folding closed, everything growing soft and dim and warm and far. Sleep now. The city is sleeping. Let it carry you down into the quiet, all the way down, into the deep and the dark and the rest. Good night. Sleep well. And we'll walk through history again, together, some other quiet night. The list of 7 wonders was made by the travelers and poets of the Greek world more than 2,000 years ago. Writers with names like Antipater and Philo gathered up the greatest sights a person could hope to see and wrote them down so that others might dream of them or set out to find them. The lists did not always agree. One poet would name a great wall, where another named a lighthouse. The 7 shifted a little from telling to telling, the way the best stories do. But over the centuries, the world settled on 7, and those are the 7 we will visit tonight. And here is the strange and beautiful thing about them. Even in the ancient world, even to the people who made the list, some of these wonders were already half a legend. Some had fallen before the travelers could reach them. Some may never have existed at all, except in the wonder of those who swore they had seen them. We are setting out, in other words, on a journey to 7 places, knowing already that we will lose 6 of them along the way. But not yet. For this story, they are all still standing. Let's go east first, far to the east, to where our first wonder may or may not have ever grown at all. Our journey begins in the old land between 2 rivers, the wide flat country the Greeks called Mesopotamia, where the city of Babylon once rose out of the dust in walls of blue and gold. And there, somewhere in that hot and ancient city, the stories say, there grew a garden in the sky, the hanging gardens of Babylon. Imagine a mountain of green in the middle of a flat brown plain. Not a hill, but a thing that people built. On purpose, stone terrace stacked upon stone terrace, each one wider below and narrower above, rising in great gentle steps like the rows of a theatre, and spilling over the edge of every terrace, tumbling down the warm stone in soft green waterfalls, grew trees and vines and flowers from every corner of the known world. Date palms and cypress, fig and pomegranate, blossoms in colors the desert had never seen. From a distance, in the shimmering heat, it must have looked like a green hill that floated, a forest growing in the empty air. And the marvel was not only the green, it was the water. For a garden to hang in the dry Babylonian sky, water had to climb. Somehow, the ancient gardeners lifted water up out of the river far below and carried it to the very top, where it could trickle down through every level, cool and constant, in a land where rain was rare. The Greek travelers who described it spoke of clever machines, of a great screw that turned and drew the river upward, of hidden channels sealed with reed and lead so the water would never seep away. A whole secret machinery of coolness and green, hidden inside a mountain that should not have been able to exist. Imagine walking up through it in the heavy gold of a Babylonian afternoon. Imagine climbing the wide, shallow steps from terrace to terrace, out of the glare and the dust of the city below, and feeling the air grow cooler and softer with every level you rise. The sound of the city fading, the trickle of running water somewhere just out of sight, the shade of broad green leaves moving over you, and the scent all around of damp earth and blossom and ripening fruit, in the middle of a desert where such things had no business being. Birds in the high branches, the whole world gone quiet and green and kind. To walk there must have felt like climbing up out of the ordinary world into a gentler one, a garden floating above the heat, halfway to the sky. And here is the mystery, the deepest of all our 7. We do not actually know that the hanging gardens were ever real. Of all the wonders, this is the only one whose very existence is uncertain. Because for all the Greek travelers who marveled at it, the people of Babylon themselves left not a single word about it. Their king, Nebuchadnezzar, recorded everything he ever built, every wall and gate and temple, carved in clay and stone, and nowhere, not once, did he mention a garden in in the sky. And the great Greek historian who walked through Babylon and described its wonders in loving detail somehow never thought to write the gardens down at all. So some say the gardens truly stood in Babylon and are simply lost beneath the dust, waiting. Some say they were never in Babylon at all, but far to the north, in another great city called Nineveh, built by a different king, and that over the long centuries the two cities blurred together in the retelling. And some say, very gently, that perhaps there was never any garden at all, only a story so lovely that everyone wished it true, until wishing made it one of the wonders of the world. We will never quite know, and there is something fitting in that, for the very first stop on our journey to be a green and beautiful question mark, a wonder made half of stone and half of longing. We will leave it there, glowing softly in the heat haze, neither quite real nor quite imagined, and turn our road toward the sea. Westward now, away from the rivers and across the dry hills, to the bright coast of Asia Minor, where the land meets the blue Aegean. There, in the busy harbour city of Ephesus, stood a temple so vast and so white that sailors could see it long before they could see the shore. The temple of Artemis. It was built for the goddess Artemis, and it was, by the account of everyone who ever stood before it, the most magnificent temple the ancient world ever raised. Picture not a building so much as a forest of marble. More than 100 columns of gleaming white stone, each one as tall as 6 men standing on each other's shoulders, marching in long rows across a platform the size of a small field. Sunlight came down between them in pale gold bars. Doves moved through the high shadows, and at the base of each great column, carved into the marble, were figures so fine they seemed about to step down and walk. It was twice the size of any temple the Greeks had built before. Travelers wrote that they had seen many sacred places, palaces and pyramids and walls, but that when they saw the temple of Artemis rising into the clouds, all the others seemed to fall into shadow. To step inside was to lose yourself in cool white stone. The columns rose so high above you that their tops were lost in soft shadow, and walking among them was like walking through a grove of marble trees, the floor smooth and pale underfoot, the air still and cool and faintly sweet with incense. Here and there a shaft of sun came slanting down between the pillars and lit a drifting column of dust, or the gold of an offering left at the goddess's feet. For pilgrims came from every land and left their treasures here, and the temple gleamed softly with all of it. You could stand in the middle of that marble forest and turn slowly around and see no end to the columns in any direction, only white stone and pale light and quiet, and feel the whole great weight of the roof floating impossibly far above your head. It took 120 years to build, and it would not last. One night, in the cool of a summer long ago, a man set fire to it. His reasons were small and sad, only that he wished to be remembered, and he had decided that burning something beautiful was the surest way. The people of Ephesus were so angry that they forbade anyone to ever speak his name again, hoping he would vanish from memory entirely. The temple, though, they would not give up. They built it again, even grander than before, and for centuries more it stood, white and shining above the harbor. But the world slowly turned away from the old gods. The centuries wore on, raiders came, the worshippers grew few, and at last the great temple was taken apart, stone by stone, its marble carried off to other walls and other cities. Today, in a green Turkish field, a single column stands where the forest of marble once was. Just one, pieced back together from fallen fragments, standing alone in the long grass to mark where the most beautiful temple in the world once caught the morning sun. 2 wonders behind us now, 5 still ahead. We follow the coast southward, the sea always on our right hand, soft and dark and patient, until we come to another harbor and another marble marvel rising against the sky. This one was built not for a god, but for a man, and for his grief. The mausoleum at Halicarnassus. In the city of Halicarnassus there ruled a man named Mausolus, and when he died, the one who had loved him most could not bear to let him fade. So she gathered the finest builders and the greatest sculptors in all the world, and together they raised over his resting place a tomb so beautiful that it became a wonder of the earth. Picture a great square base of white marble, broad and solid as a fortress. Upon it, a ring of slender columns, 36 of them, holding up the sky. Above the columns, a roof that rose in 24 gentle marble steps, like a low pyramid climbing toward heaven. And at the very top, crowning the whole soaring structure, a chariot of marble drawn by 4 marble horses, frozen forever in mid-stride, with the figure of the king himself standing in the chariot, gazing out over his city and his sea. All across the white marble walls ran carved friezes, alive with horses and heroes, so finely cut that the stones seemed to move. It was so famous, so perfectly grand a tomb, that ever afterward, in every language that came after, any great and beautiful tomb came to be called by the dead king's name. We still use that word today, a mausoleum, a small piece of Halicarnassus, hidden inside a word we hardly think about, carried quietly down all the years. The tomb of Mausolus was a patient wonder. While other marvels burned or fell, it simply stood, century after century, long after the city around it had changed its name and its gods and its language. It stood for more than 1,000 years. But the earth beneath that coast is restless, and slowly, over the ages, earthquakes shook it and cracked it, and at last brought the proud marble down. And much later, when knights came to build a castle by the harbor, they found the fallen marble lying ready to hand, and they carried it away to raise their walls. To this day, you can see smooth blocks of the king's tomb set into the stones of that seaside castle, holding up a fortress, holding up the years. We are halfway now. The night is deep and the road is soft. Let us cross the water to the heart of the Greek world, to a quiet green valley where the first games were held, a place called Olympia. There, inside a temple in a grove of olive trees, sat a god made of gold, the statue of Zeus at Olympia. He was made by the greatest sculptor who ever lived, a man named Phidias, and he was not a statue you looked at so much as a presence you stood before. Imagine stepping out of the bright Greek sun into the cool shadow of a temple, and finding there, filling the whole far end of the great hall, the king of the gods himself, seated upon a throne. He was made of gold and ivory, his skin the warm pale ivory of elephant tusk, his robe and his crown and his scepter all of shining gold. In one open hand he held a small winged figure of victory, in the other a scepter with an eagle resting upon it. His throne was dark cedar wood, inlaid with gold and ebony and glimmering jewels, painted with stories, guarded by carved lions. And he was enormous. Seated, his head nearly brushed the roof of the temple, so that visitors used to say, with a kind of nervous wonder, that if the god ever chose to stand, he would lift the whole roof from the building and step out into the sky. Before him, set into the temple floor, lay a still, shallow pool of olive oil, dark and mirror smooth, and it caught the gold of him and threw it softly back, so that the god seemed to glow with a light of his own in the dimness. People came from across the world simply to stand in that quiet hall and feel very small and very safe in the presence of something so vast and so calm. There was a hush in that place that travelers tried and mostly failed to describe. The cool, dim air after the bright valley outside, the way the gold of him seemed to hold its own soft light gathered up out of the shadows, the faint smell of olive oil and old cedar and stone. You would have heard your own footsteps go quiet as you crossed the floor, and then nothing. Only the great calm face of the god above you, looking out over your head at something far away and eternal. His expression neither stern nor kind, but simply, endlessly at peace. People wrote that they came in tired and troubled and went out lighter, as though some of the stillness of that golden figure had passed quietly into them. That was the wonder of it. Not only that it was beautiful, but that it made you feel for a little while that all was well. For some 800 years he sat there, golden in the temple shadow. And then the old world changed once more. The games were ended, the temple fell silent, and the great statue was seen no longer. Some say he was carried far away to a distant city and lost there to a fire. Some say he burned in his own temple when it fell. The record grows quiet, and the accounts disagree, and the truth slips away into the dark. We know only that the most beautiful image of a god the world had ever made simply, gently vanished, leaving behind an empty temple in an olive grove and the memory of a golden light reflected in a pool of oil. 5 wonders seen, 2 remain, and both of the last 2, as it happens, were built of fire and of stone, and both stood watch over harbours. Let us sail on through the warm dark to an island where, for a short and shining while, a giant of bronze stood beside the sea. The Colossus of Rhodes. The island of Rhodes had come through a long and frightening siege and survived it. And to give thanks, the islanders decided to build a statue to their patron, the sun god Helios. Not an ordinary statue, the largest statue in all the world. They melted down the bronze and iron the enemy had left behind, and over a dozen patient years they raised up. Beside their harbour, a figure of the sun god more than 30 meters tall, gleaming warm bronze in the Mediterranean light, his head crowned, perhaps, with the rays of the sun. A young god of metal, tall as a tower, looking out over the blue water and the little wooden ships coming home. Now, there is an old picture of the Colossus that you may carry in your mind, of the giant standing with 1 foot on each side of the harbour mouth, while ships sail in between his legs. It is a wonderful image. It is also gently not true. That picture was dreamed up far, far later, long after the statue was gone, and the real Colossus never straddled the harbour at all. He stood, as a person stands, on solid ground beside the water, on a great pedestal of white stone, one more tall and shining figure on a shore full of statues, only very much larger. That is wonder enough. We do not need the legend. And here is the gentlest sadness of all the 7. The Colossus, the largest and most dazzling of them, stood for the shortest time. Barely more than 50 years after he was raised, while he was still bright and new, the earth shook, and the great bronze god broke at the knees and came down along the shore. But even fallen, he was a wonder. The pieces were so vast that travellers came from far away simply to stand among them, to marvel at a bronze hand the size of a man, a fallen finger few could wrap their arms around. And the people of Rhodes, told by an oracle to leave him where he lay, did exactly that. So for nearly 900 years, far longer than he had ever stood, the Colossus rested along the harbour of Rhodes, a quiet, sleeping giant of green gold bronze, lying in the grass and the sea air, while the centuries drifted over him. Think of that, gently, for a moment. A fallen god the size of a temple, lying full length along the warm shore, his great bronze limbs going slowly green in the salt air, wild flowers growing up around his curved fingers, lizards sunning themselves on his shoulder, the tide whispering in and out beside him, year after year after year. Children who played in his shadow grew old and died, and their grandchildren grew old, and still he lay there, patient and enormous and at rest, looking up at the same blue sky he had once stood beneath. He spent so much longer sleeping by that harbour than he ever spent standing over it. Only after all those long centuries was the great bronze at last gathered up and carried away and melted down to become 1,000 smaller things, and the Colossus passed quietly out of the world, one wonder left to find before the oldest of all, and it, too, kept watch over a harbour with a light. Let us sail south now, across the open sea toward Egypt, through a night so dark that sailors could lose the whole world. And then, low on the horizon, a single point of warm orange fire, steady and welcoming, growing as we draw near, until it resolves into the tallest tower the ancient world had ever built, the Lighthouse of Alexandria. At the mouth of the great harbour of Alexandria, on a low island of pale limestone, the kings of Egypt raised a tower to hold a fire. And what a tower! It rose in 3 great tiers, each one set back from the one below, like 3 buildings stacked one upon another and reaching for the sky. A square base, broad and strong, an 8-sided middle, and a round top, slender and graceful. No one is quite sure exactly how tall it stood, for the measurements are lost. But the careful guesses run to 120 meters or more, taller than anything else made by human hands for a very long time after. White stone, rising and rising out of the blue water, the tallest thing for as far as a ship could sail. And at the very top, night and day, a fire. By night it burned, a steady warm flame held up against the whole dark Mediterranean, and behind it, the stories say, a great mirror of polished bronze caught the light and threw it far out to sea, so that sailors a day's voyage away could see Alexandria glowing on the edge of the world and steer for home. By day, perhaps, that same mirror flashed the sunlight as a signal, a fire to guide the lost in, held up in the dark by a tower of white stone. Of all the wonders, this one did the kindest work. It simply helped people find their way home. Picture being one of those sailors. Picture a small wooden ship far out on the night sea, the stars hidden behind cloud, no land in any direction, only the dark water lifting and falling, and the cold uncertainty of not knowing quite where you are. And then, low on the black horizon, the faintest warm point of orange, steady, unwavering, growing slowly as the hours pass and the oars pull, until it is unmistakably a fire, a great calm fire burning high in the dark, and you know, with a flood of relief, that it is Alexandria, and that you are nearly home. For 1,000 years that fire kept its watch so that tired people on the sea would not be lost. There is no gentler thing for a wonder to do. It guided ships for more than 1,000 years. 1,000 years of sailors, generation after generation, looking up in the night and seeing that faithful light. But the same patient earthquakes that toppled the bronze giant came at last for the lighthouse too, shaking it across the long centuries, a little lower each time, until the great tower was only a ruin on its island. And in the end, an Egyptian sultan took the fallen stones, the very bones of the lighthouse, and built from them a fortress to guard the harbor, so that even now, where the fire once burned, a castle stands on the lighthouse's stones and watches over the same blue water. And far below, on the floor of the harbor, divers in our own time have found great blocks of carved stone lying in the green dark, fallen pieces of the tower, sleeping under the sea. 6 wonders now behind us. 6 we have found, and one by one, gently lost. The garden that may never have grown. The temple taken apart for other walls. The tomb turned into a castle, and a word. The golden god who vanished into the dark. The bronze giant melted into 1,000 things. The lighthouse sunk beneath its own harbor. All of them gone. All of them now only words and wonder, carried down to us by the travelers who once stood beneath them and tried to find the language for what they saw. And yet, our journey is not over. For there is one wonder left, the oldest of them all, older than all the others by far, and it is still there. We sail the last stretch of our journey down to Egypt and up the green ribbon of the Nile and out at last onto the desert plateau at Giza, where the oldest wonder in the world has been waiting, patiently, longer than almost anything that human beings have ever made, the Great Pyramid. It was already ancient when the travelers made their list. Think on that for a moment, softly, as you lie there. When the Greek poets wrote down the 7 wonders, the Hanging Gardens, if they were ever real, were a few centuries old. The lighthouse was newer still, but the Great Pyramid had already been standing for more than 2,000 years before any of them. It was as old to the ancient Greeks as the ancient Greeks are to us. It had already watched whole worlds rise and fall before the other wonders were even imagined. It was built for a pharaoh named Khufu almost 46 centuries ago by thousands of skilled workers from across Egypt who came season after season to move the great stones into place. Not slaves, as the old tales sometimes say, but builders, fed and paid and housed in their own villages beside the work, who raised over 2 million blocks of limestone into a single perfect mountain of stone, so vast and so precisely made that even now we marvel at how careful hands could have done it. And it did not always look the way it looks today. When it was new, the whole pyramid was sheathed in smooth, polished white limestone, fitted so tightly you could not have slipped a blade between the stones, gleaming so brightly in the desert sun that it must have been almost too dazzling to look upon. A mountain of white light on the edge of the red desert, perhaps crowned at its very peak with a single shining capstone, visible for miles and miles across the valley and the river. The newest, brightest, most enormous thing in the world. Stand at its foot in your mind and look up. The polished white slope rising away from you, smooth as still water, climbing and climbing until its edge cut a clean line against the deep blue Egyptian sky. The desert silent all around, the heat shimmering, the green thread of the Nile far below. You could not take it in all at once. The eye simply could not hold something so large and so perfect, made by hands, set down here at the edge of the sand. And it was already old, even then, old beyond old. The people who would later call it a wonder were not even a thought yet. Whole languages had not yet been invented, and still it stood, gleaming and patient, keeping the kind of time that mountains keep. That bright white casing is gone now, carried off long ago to build a nearby city, and the pyramid we see today is the great stepped core beneath, golden brown in the sun. But it stands, after everything, after the garden and the temple and the tomb, after the god and the giant and the lighthouse, after earthquakes and fires, and the slow, erasing hand of time took all the others away. The oldest wonder of them all simply remained. It is still there tonight, out on the dark plateau under the same stars, exactly where it has stood for nearly 5,000 years. 6 of the 7 wonders are gone. We met them all tonight, and we watched them all slip away into legend, into rubble, into the sea, into a single column standing in a field. They live now only in the words of the travelers who loved them, and in quiet stories told in the dark, like this one. There is no shame in that. To be remembered with wonder, long after you are gone, is its own kind of lasting. And the seventh wonder is still standing, still keeping its long watch over the desert and the river, patient and enormous and calm, as the stars wheel slowly over it, the way they have for 50 centuries. It simply remains. So let yourself grow heavy and still now, like that great pyramid out on the silent sands. The journey is done. We found all 7, the 6 that vanished and the 1 that stays. There is nothing more to look for tonight, and nowhere left to sail. The map can be folded and set aside. The fire has burned down low and warm. Let the lost wonders glow gently in the dark behind your eyes. The green garden and the marble temple, the golden god and the bronze giant and the faithful lighthouse fire. Let them fade, soft and unhurried, the way they faded from the world, leaving only wonder behind. And let the oldest one keep its watch while you sleep, steady and silent under the stars, as it always has, and as it will long after this quiet night is over. Rest now. The wonders will keep. Sleep well.